Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardina. We have another great episode for you today. It's kind of a funny episode. In full disclosure, we reached out to Jake before the tornadoes hit Omaha, and then the tornadoes hit. And so in addition to all of his other experience he can bring to the table, we're going to ask him a little bit about what happened there, maybe provide an after action. But Jake is the Senior Preparedness Specialist or Emergency Preparedness Specialist for Omaha and the Power District there. He can give us the full name in a second. But essentially, he comes out with a ton of experience, not just from the military side when he was in the Air Force, but now on the civilian side working with in Omaha. And he let me know before the podcast, before we started recording, that they had no deaths. And so that was really huge. But as we're recording this right now, I just got a message not only 5 or 10 minutes ago that my friends in Joplin are now dealing with a tornado. And so that name should ring a bell for a lot of people. So we're definitely still in tornado season. When this airs, hopefully we'll be kind of beyond that. But we all think about tornadoes and all of our friends in the paths of tornadoes. And so good luck to all the responders and obviously everybody else out there. But with that, Jake, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's good to have you.
Hey, I appreciate the invite. I'm looking forward to the conversation. It's great.
So you have a ton of different experience. I mentioned the Air Force a little bit. Could you just go through really almost like rapid fire, let our audience know? And I know I butchered your title and the Power District name. So could you provide that for us as well?
Absolutely. So I like a couple of the people you had on the show previously. I joined the Air Force. I became an emergency manager. Did that hazmat response piece for a while. Moved up into that emergency operations center role. Did some EOC management up in North Dakota for the Red River flood fight up there. And then all the way down to Las Vegas, Nevada at Nellis Air Force Base, where all sorts of unique scenarios down there. And then I ended up here at Omaha Public Power District. We are Nebraska's fully public power, so unique to the United States about that. 13 counties on the east side of the farthest east of Nebraska. So a little bit of the city and then a lot of the rural counties throughout.
So if you're not in a tornado, what does your day-to-day operation look like for the things that you're trying to manage? Are you thinking more of the actual facilities, or are you thinking more of the constituents who are using the power?
A little bit of both, mostly the facilities. Business continuity is kind of a big topic, right? Making sure that our lights are on for all of our customers. But that involves our production facilities, because we have a vast array of production and facilities, transmission to the to some of the larger locations, and then distributing that to every single customer throughout the counties. So making sure that those functions of the business are prepared for all the types of disasters that Omaha and the counties throws at us.
It's fascinating when we talk to a lot of people, especially I won't say the doomsday preppers, but people who are more into personal preparedness. They'll say things like food, shelter, clothing. You need food, shelter, clothing. I don't think people realize sometimes how much we all rely on power for literally everything. And when storms hit, I was talking to a National Guard unit about this. We often think of a power outage as a couple hours, right? You guys are phenomenal about getting the power on. You're already doing it now. But in the scope of a long-term power outage, when people are on defibrillators and when they're on and they need their diabetes medicine refrigerated, and all that stuff starts to play in the supply chain that goes into it. From a power perspective, from a BIA perspective, we really need to start saying food, water, shelter, power, because we're so independent on that, and there are vulnerabilities behind it, right? So from your perspective on threats, is the Craig Fugate, the thing he's most worried about is terrorist squirrels, the thing that keeps you up, or what are the things that you're like, okay, from a power perspective, from a BIA perspective, that you have to focus on immediately every single day? Like, no matter what, it has to keep operating.
Yeah, great question. The cyber is always a conversation. Cyber security, it seems like in the last 5 years, the landscape of cybersecurity has changed as much as emergency management has changed in the last 100 years. And I don't know how we keep up. It seems like every day there's a new actor wanting to disrupt our grid and our livelihood. And it does affect every other lifeline there is. It's kind of a unique lifeline where if you don't have power, hospitals are having a hard time. Roads are having a hard time. Every one of those lifelines are having a hard time. So it definitely keeps me awake at night thinking of all the different ways that we can be disruptive, because there's also our climate seems to be adjusting a little bit, where we have the Missouri River. We rely on the Missouri River, and sometimes we have ice on the river, and sometimes we have not enough water on the river.
Yeah.
So when a lot of cities and counties and states are worrying about too much water, the power is worrying about not enough water. And so how do you balance that? Because without enough water, we start talking about having to curtail some of those that power production, and that can start affecting communities really fast.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapsed and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today.
Does the water in your neck of the woods, because you're mentioning water, and forgive my ignorance here, besides like mills, producing electricity, when you say water, how does water impact your facilities?
Oh, it's our primary. So two of our primary generators are coal burning and natural and gas, and we produce steam. So we use the water to produce the steam to generate the electricity, but we also use it to cool the equipment. And so when we have a pump that draws it out of that river, and when that river water runs low, you just can't get any more water out of the river. Yes. And the plants are designed to kind of protect themselves. So we start to rely on some of that diversity of our portfolio, looking other places for ways to generate, and so that our customers can make sure that they have the lights on.
From a readiness perspective, outside of water, what are like the 4 or 5 different critical needs you have to look at for like a risk assessment, like strain on the power system? So if water is a natural one, there's always media about like how much power people are consuming. And you see people are using it a lot more in their homes. They have more electronics. They have more. From your perspective, are those actually putting real strains on it? Are they not? Like, what are the things that, if I was an emergency manager in a different community and I'm looking at my 7 different lifelines, and I get in there and I'm like, okay, I'm responding to this hurricane or whatever it may be, and I'm trying to help out power, what should I be focusing on from a vulnerability standpoint?
I think that that's a great question, because the big conversation right now is electric vehicles. Everybody's putting electric vehicles and straining the grid. And there is definitely, with the way we use electricity today is not the same as we used electricity 50 years ago. And the data centers going up, we're using electricity at a greater rate. Individual customers as well as larger consumers, like Google, Meta, those locations, they definitely draw a lot more load on the grid. But I think that the diversity of the grid, of the power production, is what keeps it safe and keeps it reliable. Not just our ability to stay diverse, but we are tied into some good neighbors in the Nebraska area, Southwest Power Pool. So when we have a hard time, we can bring in energy from the other areas that may not be having a hard time, and then we return the favor if they're having a hard time, whether it's cold snaps and they have a really high load because everybody's running their heaters, or it's the summer and everybody's running air conditioners. So it is, if you're an emergency manager in a community, it's reaching out to that power sector and making sure you know that they're not just reliant on windmills, they're not just reliant on the dam for hydropower. Finding out all those so that when you see that a tornado has went through a county or a community, you'll know that they have a generator out there or they have a nuclear power plant out there, and you can have conversations with them, real adult conversations of how much is that going to impact our load? Are you still reliable?
Nice.
Are you able to produce that energy for us? And if not, we want to tell you, coming from a power company, we want to tell you as soon as possible, because I'm a citizen of Omaha, Nebraska. And so I'm not only working for the power company, but I'm also a customer. And I definitely care when the people in my city don't have power. So
3 years ago, Snowmageddon in Texas. We did a whole thing about it, and we interviewed some people about it, and so we learned a lot. And essentially, I was very frustrated at the time because in Harvey, we knew about the lack of fuel storage. It really was a fuel storage issue more than anything, but it ended up impacting, heating, and it eventually ended up impacting power as well. When you're going through and looking at other incidents around the country, like potentially what happened in Texas or in other communities, how does that play in Omaha? Because your problems are not Texas problems, right? And your community, the way you guys are, even for the initial, from this conversation, I can tell like how drastically is different how it operates. If you are unique in the country of how you operate not just as an organization, but how you pool that grid or how you organize that grid, is it difficult to pull in after actions? Do you have to really rely on your team? What are the systems that you're relying on to make sure that you're quote unquote doing best practice where you're at?
Great question. So
sorry, my questions are like going around.
It's okay. I completely understand. So yeah, the situation in Texas, that got pretty grave there for a while. Their inability to produce enough power, and then when talking about load shedding and having to determine which customers you shut power off to, can get really really stressful at times. For us, we produce, we strive, and we're growing even today, where you have plants going up. Again, that diversity, some natural gas and some fuel oil, so that we don't have to rely on one source, and including wind and some solar farms too. But the idea is for us we want to produce well over our peak load. We want to be able to have the ability to produce over that peak load. So if ever there was a situation where we would max out, and we would lose a generation capability, that we would be able to stay for an amount of time, we would be able to stay above and be able to produce power for our customers. Now, there is constraints like the Winter Storm Jerry that went through Nebraska, where it shut off major interstates coming in and out of the state. So fuel delivery was starting to get a little stressed there. But again, that diversity made it so that we didn't have to rely on that. We could switch back and forth, and our pool was able to help us out. The Southwest Power Pool was able to help us out.
That's awesome. It sounds like you guys are doing like a lot of things right. I think about I'm just pulling up from all the other incidents and just keep trying to hear your thoughts on it, because you have these already recurring themes. How much do you have to pay attention to the policy of PSPS on the West Coast, the public safety power shutoffs? Like, their infrastructure so old that I think it's a terrible idea, but I get why they're doing it. Every time there's a high wind event, we're just going to shut off the power because we're worried of wildfires. Again, Nebraska, very different. But when there's a tornado going through or whatever, do you have like the standard protocols of this is how we shut it off, this is how we turn it on? I'm sure all of that exists. But from a vulnerability standpoint, I'm just hyper curious about how all these different places around the country are doing it. And then you got you guys who are kind of, sounds like the model for trying to do it right.
It's a unique to be an emergency manager working with the power companies on the West Coast during a high wind event. Wow, what a stressful situation.
It is awful.
Having to determine shut power off to save communities, right? Some of those communities had some significant fires, and it was a really bad situation there. Luckily, our ability to produce transmit power throughout the state and to other states is really resilient in that nature. We definitely don't have that threat. We haven't had to shut down lines in a situation like that. If we did, again, we have had situations in the past where we had to determine the load was getting significant. The entire area relies on each other, so we got to make sure that we are able to keep. If we do have to curtail, there's other large companies that can help us out in that space. For example, some of the data centers have the ability to provide generation capability alone, right? Some hospitals are able to provide generation capability. So we'll reach out to them and say, hey, can you run and reduce the load? And they'll help us out. That's what's one of the great things about Omaha is that community aspect. Every time we've had those situations, we've reached out to the community, and those communities, the community partners have helped out and reduced that load a significant amount to help us get through those situations.
Is there any regulatory requirements for you to check on the hospitals, like how often they're running their generators, or like working with them in that community effort? I know in DC we had to run our diesel generators like every 2 weeks by regulation in Maryland. So how does that operate?
It doesn't affect us. We work with them because we would like to do some exercises and drills with them so that they can test their response capability. Most of that can happen on their side. We just like to communicate with them. We have their phone numbers. A lot of it is, believe it or not, EPA driven. If they're going to run their generator for 7 days straight and they're producing a lot of that stuff coming out into the atmosphere, we have our own EPA regulations, and we take a lot of. Obviously, we're producing some, and so they have their own. So they have to be careful if they go into that situation. Obviously, if it's an emergency, a lot of that gets waived. And companies or organizations like the hospital, they definitely have regulation that says that they have to be a certain level of reliability to provide electricity. And the counties and the state definitely steps in and has those, make sure that they are above that level. And we just help out where we can.
Speaking of emergencies, if we can switch topics a little bit, because we've been dancing around it for a little while, but the tornadoes that went through Omaha, what was your response tempo look like? And I was really happy to hear. I was surprised, to be honest. It's very impressive that you're already moving into recovery. Not other communities are able to perform at that level. I know you're talking about community level and not working with lots of different groups. Can you kind of give, especially by the time this airs for everybody, just kind of the overview of what happened and how it impacted you guys?
Sure. Yeah. It was a Friday afternoon, so a lot of people were driving home, and it was a unique storm because the tornadoes seemed to pop up on radar, or the storms seemed to pop up on radar and immediately start rotating. So as soon as the National Weather Service would see the storm, there would be a spotter on the ground saying it's rotating. I had already been home, so I was hanging out with my kids, and I'm a storm spotter for the National Weather Service. So I was outside on their Slack 2.0 that they call it. So everyone was just watching. So I was monitoring that, hoping that I have a different outlook when I switched to power company. I used to love seeing storms, and now I'm like, please don't hit us. Little different outlook in life, but
yeah.
So I was in my basement because the siren started going off around us. So I was in my basement, and then we started to really notice it was getting serious. And then the one hit when the big tornado hit out at Elkhorn. I knew from the news and from our reports on the ground that this was going to be a significant event for the city, for the county, as well as our power company. So I was in constant contact we have a really robust storm team that has been doing storms for, well, as long as we've been producing electricity. So they are really good. They're kind of like the firemen in an incident command, right? The firemen know how to do it because they've been doing it ever since we've been putting up houses. So they've kind of taken the lead on it. So they activated real quick. I think they activated about 4:00 on Friday, and the sirens were still going off above my house, and we were coordinating on our laptops. Technology is great because we were able to stand up our virtual communications and start communicating of who knows what. The night before, we kind of knew that the storm was going to have a potential for bad. So we staged some crews with some people on a little extra duty so that we could make sure that if it did turn bad, we could respond pretty quick. The area that got hit the hardest, a lot of that is a little more modern than some of our rural areas. So it's a lot of underground. So we did lose some big transmission lines, and those take a lot of teams and a lot of time to recover from. But like you said, 2 days, and we were about 98% back. We had a lot of mutual aid, a lot of our local mutual aid. The Nebraska Public Power Company came over and helped us really fast there. We were able to receive, we have a really good system in place to activate the mutual aid, and then they just flow into our work, kind of like the volunteer situations when the Red Cross and those, when you have a hurricane or any other major event, and they just are able to just go into your fold. The same with those. So we were able to really, the response went fast. There's a lot of homes that we won't be returning service to them because the homes are just, there's not a lot left of those. So once we start rebuilding those communities, then we'll definitely be working hand in hand with them to get their service back on.
That's nuts.
9 tornadoes is what they said. So
9 tornadoes, and you were able to get 98% back up within 2 days. I've been to tornado response. It's hard for me to fathom that because there was tornadoes in Georgia that I specifically went up to. I think it was 2017 or 2016. I think there was 2017 Macon, Georgia, and it was a while. It was a while before we could get stuff back up, not just power but other things too. And unfortunately, you would drive down the streets and try not to get emotional. The construction crews, if there was a death in that home, when they were taking down the trees, they would carve crosses into the trees. So you just drive down the street and cross. And it was rough. And so the fact that you guys, 9 tornadoes, getting back up online, getting people on their feet, that's truly incredible.
Absolutely.
So kudos to you and kudos to your storm team. Sorry that they have so much experience, but sometimes experience is good for the soul, And
absolutely.
Right. So we do the job. I'm looking at the time here and trying to be respectful of your time and understand that you have a lot going on. From somebody who has just literally gone through the ringer with 9 tornadoes, and you're getting things back online, and you're still doing with business continuity, and there could be more storms in the future. What would be your advice? I mean, you're kind of I'm thinking about St. Louis Arch here. You're all critical infrastructure leans on you on either side of it, right? You're that stone. And so if you already have great communications with the partners, and you're already relying on other people, and you already have backup systems, and you're already oh my gosh, you're saying all the right things. If you ever lose your job, call me. I'll hire you immediately. But like, if you're already doing all that, where does somebody who doesn't have any of that start? Because there's a whole lot of communities who don't have those things. And it's very hard to like start to get some momentum there. So like, what have you done to find all that success?
I always wonder how I ended up here myself. When I joined the Air Force so many years ago, how did I end up in a power company in Omaha, Nebraska? And I think if I could sum it up, what would have helped me, and I wish I would have known a long time ago, do your best when you're first starting. Do your best to identify what you want to do in emergency management, because a lot of emergency managers, when they start emergency management, they don't know that it's a pretty diverse group. We have responders or Rubicon teams that run out and help debris and are pulling rubble, and we have FEMA administrators that are sitting in DC doing policy, and then we have directors of emergency management of a small county of 1,000 people who's filling also a county clerk and other jobs, and there's room for all of them. So identifying that early, what you want to do, if you can. Sometimes I still sometimes feel like I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, but because then when you get in, then you just start making those connections, and not that any connection is a waste, but you can focus on the connections and the networking at that level. So if you want to do something unique, like be a power company emergency manager, look for those unique situations. Don't spend a lot of time with the FEMA policies, because a lot of what we do doesn't fit into that mold. It doesn't fit into that ICS forms and everything's all, we have to go outside the box more than we're inside the box. And if that's what you want to do, then search those out, because there are out there. University emergency management. I work quite a bit with the George Washington University in St. Louis. There we have Region 7. They're pretty active in Region 7, so love working with them. But yeah, I hope that sums up a little bit. That's what I would
I think it's a good call out. In fact, I'll be the controversial guy here for a second, because I've been doing this for like 4 years now. So if I lose everybody, it's been a good run. But I've worked in FEMA. I literally have a FEMA award behind me. I like FEMA. Please don't roast me for this FEMA thing. But what you just said is 100% correct. FEMA policy is good for if that's the route you want to take. But people forget that the federal agency has a requirement to teach and to operate as a federal agency. It is the reason why I've had Jeff Stern on here, who is EMI superintendent. I've had Pete Gaynor. I've had Craig Fugate. I've had Brock Long. I've had all these, and every single one of them who's all involved in that process will all say the same thing. FEMA doesn't set standards. They have lots of classes. They will teach how they do it. But for everybody else who's not in a federal agency, maybe the information doesn't work exactly for you. And trying to fit that in a box is very difficult. I remember being at the National Cancer Institute. I brought up the power a second ago. I was in charge of the largest healthcare system in the United States, and we were trying to figure out how to use an IEP. An IEP is a legal document between a state and a federal in a response. It doesn't make any sense. And so I just love that you called that out, that there is a place for everybody in lots of different roles. And the one thing I do disagree with you on, and kind of agree with you on, is I have jumped between different jobs so much over the last several years. I love trying new things. In the last couple years, we've been calling it dynamic populations, but essentially, I love working with professional stadiums. I love working with universities. I love working with corporations, because those are like the biggest challenge in the world. You have people, you have an organization that has to keep operating, especially a stadium who wants to bring fans in, and you're like, hey, let's talk about readiness. And they're like, why? It's so fun to like figure out those problem sets, and you're doing it. And you said, and I'm going to compliment you again, it's like the compliment episode or something. you're doing everything right. You're bringing in the communities, you're bringing in different partners, you're diversifying capabilities and response. That is how you do it. And if anything else, I hope that's what people take away from this episode. Seriously.
Great. Absolutely. And I like I appreciate the healthy, that disagreement there. I just kind of wish that I would have been exposed to some of those opportunities. I didn't even know that they existed across the whole, and I think that if you can get exposed to those early, then you'll learn about them earlier, and then maybe you'll have an opportunity that some emergency managers just don't have because they just stay in that little niche, or they reach for the higher levels. So,
well, how about this? If you like what you're doing, get better at that. Right? For me, personally, I would just get kind of bored. I'm like, somebody said, hey, do GIS and FEMA. And I was like, I have an operations background. I'm not a GIS guy. And then all of a sudden I was the GIS guy on a FEMA team, and I loved it. But I had to keep jumping. And like I said, I finally found that area which I liked. However, to your point, on this podcast, every single week, we find somebody that has a really cool background, a different perspective that we want to talk to. And I have talked to so many people just like you, just not like you, but just like you, where I'm like, that was a job? That was a job I could have applied for? I had Corey Smith on here. She's the head of exercise and training for emergency management for Wells Fargo. That was, if that would have not been even close to my radar 10 years ago. That's a job you can apply for.
Absolutely.
So I love the fact that you're calling it out. And it like hits between this, these two concepts of be curious, but once you find what you like, get really good at that thing.
Absolutely. There you go.
And I feel like that's the happy medium. So with that, Jake, thanks again for coming on to me, for sharing your opinions, for letting me talk maybe too much more than I should. But seriously, it is a pleasure and a real honor to have you on the show. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that opportunity.
All right, everybody. If you like this podcast, which you should have because Jake is doing everything right out there in Omaha, if you liked it, you should give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. If you're in power, or if you're trying to find something new, or you're listening to this episode, you're like, I didn't know that was a thing. If you have questions for him, you can send us an email at contact@thereadinesslab.com and we'll send it over to him. Or better, when we promote the episode, you should just go on LinkedIn or on Instagram or one of our other channels and put out the question to the field, allow him to answer, allow that community to answer, and make it a thing. So with that, we want to thank Jake again, and we will see everybody for the next episode next week. Thanks.